Europe trembled beneath a single name: Napoleon. Armies shattered, kings dethroned, borders erased and redrawn like chalk lines on a battlefield. To many, his dominance felt unstoppable, almost inevitable. But history doesn't just belong to emperors, because far from the grand battlefields, beyond the thunder of cannons and marching columns, a different kind of war was being fought. A quieter war. A war of shadows. And in that war, a small, unconventional force would help bring down the greatest military machine Europe had ever seen. By the early 1800s, Napoleon Bonaparte had perfected war. His Grande Armée wasn't just large, it was fast, flexible, and terrifyingly efficient. Traditional armies struggled to keep up. Meet him in open battle, and you risked total destruction. Britain understood this. They couldn't always beat Napoleon head-on. So instead, they asked a different question. What if we don't fight his army the way he expects? War, up until this point, followed rules. Uniforms, lines, drums. Officers shouting commands over smoke-filled fields. But what if soldiers didn't wear bright uniforms? What if they didn't stand in lines? What if they didn't fight fair? This was the birth of something new. Not quite an army, not quite a spy network. A hybrid. A force designed to move fast, strike precisely, and vanish. At the heart of this transformation were men unlike any soldiers Europe had seen. The British riflemen. Dressed in dark green instead of bright red, they blended into forests, hills, and shadows. Their weapon of choice, the Baker rifle, was slower to reload than a musket, but far more accurate. While traditional soldiers fired volleys blindly into smoke, these men aimed, carefully, deliberately. Officers, scouts, messengers, targets that mattered. Imagine the battlefield, smoke thick in the air, muskets cracking in chaotic rhythm, and somewhere, hidden behind a tree or crouched along a ridge, a rifleman waits. He doesn't fire when told. He fires when it counts. One shot. One officer falls. And suddenly, confusion spreads. Orders don't come. Lines falter. The machine begins to break from within. But this new kind of warfare would truly prove its power far from Britain's shores. In Spain. The Peninsular War. Napoleon had invaded, expecting another swift victory. Instead, he walked into a nightmare. Spanish fighters, guerrillas, refused to fight like a traditional army. They ambushed supply lines, destroyed communication routes, vanished into mountains and villages. And Britain saw opportunity. Because this was exactly the kind of war their new forces were built for. British commander Arthur Wellesley, later known as the Duke of Wellington, understood something crucial. You don't beat Napoleon by playing his game. You beat him by rewriting the rules. Wellington combined disciplined British troops with guerrilla tactics and elite light infantry like the riflemen. Together, they created a new kind of warfare. Flexible, adaptive, unpredictable. Instead of grand, sweeping battles, they struck where it hurt most. Supply lines, communication routes, isolated units. French forces found themselves constantly harassed, always watched, never safe. Imagine marching through hostile territory where every hill might hide a rifle, every village might conceal an enemy, Every road could become a trap. This wasn't war. This was exhaustion, psychological pressure, a slow, relentless drain.
Napoleon could win battles, but he couldn't control Spain. And every soldier tied down there was one less soldier for his grand campaigns elsewhere. The Peninsular War became what Napoleon himself would later call a Spanish ulcer. It bled him, slowly, endlessly.
For French soldiers, fear wasn't just on the battlefield anymore. It followed them everywhere, at night, on patrol, even in moments of rest. Because the enemy didn't fight fair. They didn't announce themselves. They didn't line up. They simply appeared, struck, and disappeared again. While Napoleon prepared for massive campaigns, including his disastrous invasion of Russia, his forces in Spain remained trapped in a war they couldn't win. Britain's unconventional approach was working, not by delivering one decisive blow, but by delivering 1,000 small ones, cutting, chipping, wearing the empire down. By the time Napoleon faced his final defeat, his empire was already weakened, stretched thin, exhausted. And while the great battles, like Waterloo, would decide his fate in the end, they were only possible because of everything that came before, because of years of pressure, years of disruption, years of a war fought in the shadows. The British riflemen and their allies didn't win the Napoleonic Wars alone, but they changed how wars could be fought. They proved that discipline didn't require rigidity, that precision could outweigh volume, and that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't an army. It's unpredictability. What began in the hills of Spain would echo through history. Modern special forces, from reconnaissance units to elite commandos, all carry the DNA of these early pioneers. Small teams, high skill, strategic impact far beyond their numbers. The idea that a handful of soldiers, operating in the right way, can change the course of history. Napoleon conquered empires with thunder and steel. But in the end, it wasn't just the roar of cannons that brought him down. It was the whisper of rifle fire from the trees, the unseen enemy, the war he couldn't control. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the hidden side of history, the wars behind the wars, make sure to subscribe, because sometimes the most important stories are the ones history almost forgot.